Did you know in 1947, the Bible was firmly authenticated in archaeology, dated as old as the 3rd century BC. Every book of the Old Testament canon was found in Qumran except one, in the library which proves to be that of the very temple priest exiled there by the Hasmoneans and Pharisees. A complete and perfect connection in history proving the Bible is what it says it is. They tell us whom they were, and there really is nothing to debate. They never use the word Essenes, for instance, but identify themselves over 100 times as the exiled temple priests, the Sons of Zadok. That's the priestly family from the days of Solomon, responsible for the temple and keeping Scripture, from which the high priest comes from. They call themselves the sons of Aaron, the sons of Levi, Levites, Levitical priests, etc., etc. Over 100 times. Essenes, 0. Not even once. Wow. When the Pharisees took charge of the temple, the Dead Sea Scrolls say they defiled it, and they exiled the biblical priests who led temple worship and kept Scripture. They continued this practice in Qumran. And this is no mystery at all. The biblical Bethabara, where John the Baptist baptized Messiah. We even see it in the New Testament. A ringing endorsement from Messiah himself and the Bible that was the center of worship in this community at that time had moved from Jerusalem. However, the one book not found in this affirmed library from the temple itself originally, the Book of Esther. Why is it missing? As Esther establishes a new feast not found anywhere else in Scripture, including the entire New Testament. The question is, did this community of temple priests keep it? Is there any track? Actually, history records this, even in debate, and in this video we will cover the history of rejection specifically. Let's affirm Esther is in the Bible now and has been considered Scripture by the Catholic Church generally and continued in the Protestant canon. There's no doubting that. That is fact. But the objections are still many throughout history. Why? We will explore this in full over at least 4 videos in this series. We assure you, we will be testing on firm ground with Scripture and the precedents set by Scripture and those who kept it. Esther either fits or it doesn't. Again, the rest of the Old Testament already passes such test. Just this one book raises questions, and it's important we all know why. Not finding it among the temple priests requires we at least test this, and we shall. In the next video, we will explore the story of Esther itself. Does it make sense? Does it fit Scripture? Is its timeline even accurate with the rest of Scripture? Does it even look and sound like a Bible narrative? In the third video, for this portion of this series, we'll dig into ancient accusations that Esther hails from, these are their accusations, not ours, an occult legend. Wow, could it be? And the final and fourth video, for now anyway, in this installment, will address a find in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Remember, the Book of Esther itself was not found there. However, the scholarly community generally is claiming there are what they call proto-Esther fragments, at least two that are legible, really, according to Geese of Worms. Is Esther being alluded to in these fragments even? Or are they stretching fragments of another story, taking away the credit that belongs to another book? We will explore that, and in all of these prove out a position as we always do. In the end, we will draw a conclusion as we have enough to do so. You do not have to agree with that conclusion, but to debate it, you would have to prove it wrong. Hop in your time machine. It's time to travel through history and see what we can find. From the complete Dead Sea Scrolls in English by Geese of Worms. A well-established publishing of the Dead Sea Scrolls, this is why we use it, beginning in the 1960s, not long after they had deciphered many of these. Also, this is updated in recent years, which is important, and most sources really say the same on these. Link and source below. Among the text previously known, all the books of the Hebrew Scriptures, that's the Old Testament, are extant, at least in fragments, save Esther. That's it. Only Esther is missing, the absence of which may be purely accidental. So every book of the Old Testament was found in Qumran. That's an absolute historic endorsement of those books because we know who those were, the temple priests. Now you can breathe a sigh of relief. The Old Testament is off the hook. Only one book, except for Esther. But, that may be, could be, possibly, that's purely accidental, of course. Well, based on what? Well, as most scholars, he is placating a paradigm. You will see. However, here is the biggest thing the scholar should have thought through, at least a little. The Qumran community kept a very detailed calendar. The Book of Esther sets forth a new feast called Purim. If this community of temple priests kept Esther as scripture, they would keep Purim. Problem. It is not on any of their multiple calendars found. It's simply not there, and it would be. The Book of Esther sets forth that festival, and if it's not there, neither is Esther. And guess what? Neither are. So, there is no getting around that. And no, Qumran did not keep Esther as scripture, or between those two things, you would have found fragments and you would have found Purim being kept, and it was not. And a quick reminder, we will cover the so-called Proto-Esther fragments in an entire video at the end. Don't worry. So, who did keep it as scripture then if the temple priests did not? At that point in history, can we find that? Well, you also do not find a single reference to Purim, Esther's holiday, nor Esther's story, nor Esther as a person in the entire New Testament, mind you. Remember that. Messiah also did not keep Purim, nor use Esther in any scripture, never mentions her name or any part of her story even being referenced. Now we have this pretty well documented in the 1st century, though. Qumran scrolls are not there, so we know that part. Messiah and the Apostles are not there either. Not good, not a great start, but what else can we find? Well, if the keepers of the Bibles, Messiah and his apostles, did not keep Esther as scripture, that's a pretty bad start, but how is it in the Bible today? Who kept it as scripture, and who does the modern church listen to? That's the question. Flavius Josephus in Antiquities of the Jews in about 90 AD, that's still the 1st century, same era. Here we have it. Josephus covers much of the story of Esther. Messiah does not, the temple priests do not, but Josephus does. What does that tell you? Now, basically he endorses the story as scripture and Purim as a holiday forever. In many ways, he's really just telling the whole story, most of it, of Esther here. He really puts a lot of paper and ink to it. However, see the disconnect between the actual legitimate temple priests who were exiled to Qumran and what they kept or didn't keep versus the Pharisees and what they kept. See, remember, Josephus is an admitted Pharisee, Hasmonean, and Essene trained. He was a triple threat. The Dead Sea Scrolls represent the opposite, as they call Josephus and his people. They don't use his name because he's not around during most of their writings, probably all of their writings. Basically, calls them the sons of darkness. That's not a minor rebuke, by the way, because it's all the way until the end times. They will battle them, and those in Qumran are known as the sons of light, as John the Baptist's father even prophesied in his prophecy of John. Go read it. Wouldn't you know, Josephus praised Purim and the Book of Esther, while the exiled temple priests did not. You have the paradigm. There it is. It's right there, right in front of all of us. It was his people who kept it. Who are they? The Pharisees. Is this a Pharisee book then? A Pharisee holiday? And Esther a Pharisee, not a Hebrew? Oh, we're going to touch on that too in a later video, and you're going to love what we found. How could I say such? Well, if she were a Hebrew in her story, scripture, it would have been in the temple priest library, period. There's really nothing to discuss on that. And they would have kept Purim as a holiday. See, they just did not. Only the Pharisees did. And you have right there in the first century, we can see exactly what happened with this. Again, this holiday nor Esther are found anywhere in the New Testament, not even once either. So where is its second witness? There is none. Then we have Maimonides. He doesn't just call Esther scripture. No, he goes way further. He elevates it to just below the category of Torah. Wow. Moreover, the book's Esther, sacred character of canonicity, as well as its religious value, have been matters of considerable dispute. That's what he says, that they were disputing it. Who? Among both Jews and Christians. So note, even some Jews had disputed and have disputed Esther as scripture from the beginning. That's very telling. Whereas, for instance, the great Jewish medieval scholar Maimonides, 1135 to 1204, ranked Esther immediately after the Pentateuch, that's Torah, the 5 books of Torah, missing one, but we will get there in another video on Jubilees, in importance. Wow, Torah, really? Does Esther set law? Well, no, it doesn't. Does she even mention the name of Yahuwah, YHWH, even once? Oh, no, that doesn't happen. Does she even pray to him? Well, no. Does she even give him credit for anything? Well, not once. Does he show up in the story? He's not there. Does her uncle Mordecai the Jew? No, nothing. It doesn't happen. Even the fast is also a pagan practice that we'll cover, thus not specific to worship of Yahuwah. That's something. And Maimonides was, according to the Jewish Encyclopedia, Phariseeism became Rabbinic Judaism after the temple was destroyed. Thus, he represents the Pharisees. He was a Pharisee. Rabbi, but he was a Pharisee. Now, does the Bible agree with Pharisees? Better go read Messiah's extensive rebuke of Pharisees and warnings of partaking of their leaven or expanding gas bubbles in interpreting Scripture. Come on, guys, that's exactly what we're seeing here. It's exactly what we're seeing here, and you'll see through this. This guy is practically worshipped in Judaism. He is a Pharisee, and this is a Pharisee holiday and story indeed. They take credit for it. However, not all agreed with Maimonides, the great scholar, or Pharisee really, even among the Jews, which is revealing. Again, Qumran rejected Esther and Purim, as does the New Testament. Don't forget that foundation. It's there. A lot of people will in comments, we already know, but that's all right, we'll handle them. This is the opposite paradigm, and it is their holiday and story, not the Bible's. Yet, even some Pharisees rejected Esther. Let's do some more on that. Moreover, according to the Talmud, some Jews continued to reject the book, Esther, as late as the 3rd or 4th century AD. That's pretty late. Now, he even quotes Megillah 7a, Sanhedrin 2 from the Talmud, so you can look that up and read it. So even some rabbis did not accept Esther as scripture back in the day. That will be overwhelmed by the 4th century. We're not doubting that. But with scripture and proof of precedence, or with another lame tradition injected into another religion. Again, the New Testament and legitimate Qumran temple priests, they rejected Esther and Purim. Only Pharisees accepted it, and even some of them did not. There is no Catholic Church yet, so they're impertinent to this entire conversation, nor do they have a say, because they never had authority to decide what is or is not Scripture, especially in the Old Testament. You gotta be kidding. The Qumran priests were the authorities of such. But did the Catholic Church choose Pharisee doctrine over the Bible? Here's a snippet of an article from the Times of Israel. We will cover in more detail in a latter video. They agree with the scholar we just cited. I just wanted to show something from very modern times from Israel, so you've got it right from their lips. You can go read Megillah 7a, Sanhedrin 2, and the Talmud for yourself. It's a long conversation, too much to cover here, which is why we pulled credible fragments. We had 3 here. Even this one directly from the Jews, in fact. So there you have it. That such things troubled the sages of blessed memory is indicated by a discussion in the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Megillah 7a, a tractate dedicated to the rites and rituals of Purim. That's Esther. In the discussion, we find the vestiges of a debate about whether Megillah Esther even should be included in the Tanakh, in the Pharisee Bible. Not only did Qumran reject Esther, the New Testament rejects it and rejected it in the time of Messiah, and even some of the Pharisees rejected it initially. Wow. That's not a good foundation. And that's history. This is fact and not debatable. This is the setup for what the Catholic Church had before it in its councils, where they made such decisions. I don't really care what they decided, because they have no authority to change what is already precedence. The precedence was Esther's not Scripture. The precedence was there were other books considered Scripture that they threw out of the Bible with no authority whatsoever. The question, why did they favor Pharisee doctrine over the established Bible? Ouch. Why did they change the Bible for that matter and feel they could usurp the power of Yahushua himself and the temple priests that he placed in control back in those days? Well, again, let's be clear. Many early church fathers did not accept Esther as Scripture either. Boy, we don't really get this full story, do we? You haven't heard this in church, have you? This rejection, or at least questioning, continued in the early church. In the first 5 centuries of the Christian church. Christians were even more sharply divided over the question of Esther's canonicity. Wow. As can be seen from an examination of the list of canonical books. Go look them up, one after the other, and they're all over the map. It's amazing how much they were not on the same page. That's according to various church fathers and their writings, and that's true. Now let's look at a chart here which demonstrates this geographically. This will be a nice visual way to look at this. And you'll begin to see who aligns with the Pharisees and who better aligns with the biblical tradition instead, which was not Esther and not Purim. Here's a map from the biblical archaeologist, originally from Doubleday. Here we see the red areas are those who rejected the Book of Esther. You know, the Ecclesias of Turkey. You mean the ones from Revelation endorsed by Messiah himself? Whatever happened to them, by the way? Well, this map actually begins to show you. How come they are the only ones who got it? And how come Constantine took over that area and moved Rome's headquarters there? He was not establishing the church, at least not the one that was already in existence. He was crushing the 7 ecclesias. And that's why he was there. Because that is the origin of the synagogue of Satan, also the seat of Satan. Wow. Anyway, let's move on. Now, let's see. How come they are the only ones who got this? Why? Well, look at the others. You have Alexandria agreeing with them, so okay, fine. They didn't use Esther as scripture there, nor in basically the area of Turkey. But then you have Damascus down to Jerusalem. Or in other words, in those days, the Pharisees at that time. No lost tribes were left. All Hebrews were gone according to Scripture. They're gone. Even James says so. He says all 12 tribes are scattered. The fact that Pharisees stuck around proves they cannot be tribes of Israel who were exiled by Yahuwah out of the land. He don't fail. And who followed these Pharisees, who are really the origin of this doctrine and book? Well, this is very telling. Rome did. Its subsidiaries, including Greece, the Catholic Church, who clearly prefers Phariseeism, not just in this one instance, of course, over the Bible. Here you go. This demonstrates that point yet again. We sure are seeing quite a lot of wrestling for a book that is supposedly ranked up there with Torah, aren't we? The reason? It's not even scripture. It wasn't in the Bible in history. It was added. They claim it's in the Septuagint, but no one has the original index of the Septuagint, nor the original Septuagint from about 300 to 200 BC. And only a few fragments exist from that, and Esther is not among them. So there is no evidence Esther was a part of the Septuagint in the beginning. We just showed you the oldest history available. And then there's Persian history. Is Esther found there anywhere? Also from the biblical archaeologist. Even though the Book of Esther claims to be a strictly historical account, ever since the work of J.S. Semler in 1773, that claim has increasingly been rejected. That's as history. Esther is not history. It's not valid. To the point that in the 20th century, only a handful of critical scholars have strenuously argued for the book's historical accuracy. See, Persian history makes no mention of Esther, a similar character not in any sense. The entire event of the persecution of the Jews, the Yahudim really, is not even there, nor is the observance of Purim until the Pharisees record it as their exclusive doctrine, never making it into the actual Bible, especially not even the New Testament after those days. And when we cover the timeline, neither are most of the Hebrews even left in Persia at that time. It fits nothing, you'll see. So the Catholic Church followed the Pharisees over the biblical tradition, adding to the Word, and they will answer for that. The Pharisee canon is impertinent, as they are not the biblical keepers of Scripture, but their enemies, according to the legitimate temple priests. So what about Protestantism? Well, what did Martin Luther say about Esther? Oh boy, this is scathing. In the 1500s, even Martin Luther vehemently rejected the Book of Esther as Scripture as well as Purim. Was he crazy too? Well, just like us, of course. Well, of course, they'll brand him an anti-Semite, as they have in history, because he wrote a book on the Jews and their lies. That's the title. Why? Well, because he proved they lied. And we do that too, you know. It's not that difficult, really. Calling someone a liar and proving it so is not racism. It's moral. It's a search for the truth. You don't have to agree with him or even us, but you can't call him a racist because he called you a liar and proved you such. It doesn't work that way. It's not racism. That's truth. Here's what he said. I am so great an enemy to the second book of Maccabees. Now that goes, we have a video that you need to see if you have not, called the Hanukkah Hoax and Who Defiled the Temple, that breaks down that story very well, not from our perspective, but from the actual historical writings of the temple priests who were exiled by the Maccabees, who call them the sons of darkness who defiled the temple. And to Esther, there you go, that I wish they had not come to us at all. Can you imagine if Luther had the benefit of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which prove this in both instances? Wow. But why would he say this? Was he just a racist? No. He gives you the reason. For they have too many heathen, pagan, unnaturalities. Now that's a good reason, and certainly not racist. It's biblical. Luther noted pagan roots, and we will vet that in a latter video as well. Whether this might actually be an occult tale, because in ancient times there are many who say so. Let's vet it. The Jews much more esteemed the Book of Esther. Now that's fact. We showed you Maimonides especially, so we find Martin Luther was accurate in this quote than any of the prophets. That's for sure, because none of the prophets, I repeat, none, not a single prophet, including Ezra, who lived at the exact same time in Persia, under the same king Artaxerxes as Esther, never mentions Purim nor the story of Esther. And it happened in his days and in the days that he would have been writing. Why is it missing? Well, that we will vet further. Though they were forbidden to read it, now this is good, before they had attained the age of 30. Now this was back in the 1500s, of course. Today they do read it in synagogues. There's no doubting that. This is not saying that's not happening today, but it's saying in that age that they did not. And why? Why didn't even the Jews at that time in the 1500s, why did they seem to have some sort of an issue with this Book of Esther? By reason of the mystic matters it contains. Yeah. Whoa. Mystic matters? Heathen unnaturalities? Whew. In the Bible? That's flat out rebuke, folks. Yet many Protestants will defend this book without review. We, however, dare to ask the question, is Esther then Scripture, seeing that its history is full of not just doubt, but outright rebuke as such? I know, we're just crazy, and we are going to stay that way. What about modern times? Why, everyone accepts Esther as Bible now, right? Well, no, actually, they don't. In a dissertation meant to defend Purim and Esther, of course, based on very little, if you read it, this Jewish author, a modern Pharisee, sets forth the progression in scholarship, and we want to cover it right from his words because that's the best kind. He doesn't like it, but nevertheless, it is the case, it is fact. As early as the 18th century, scholars began to doubt the veracity, and the 1500s, and all the time before then, to the 4th century, to the 3rd century, well, even in the 1st century, but let's just ignore all that, history stuff, and let's just start with the 18th century. That's what scholars do all too often. Okay, maybe it is because modern scholarship can be a clown circus at times, no doubt. Of course, let's continue. He actually is honest in recording basically the progression. Of many facts described in Esther, so many of them are questioned, as they seem to be contradictory to the customs of the Persians, in other words, they're not history, recorded by Herodotus, an historian, and pronounce them unhistorical, because they are. The 19th and 20th centuries actually teem with hypotheses concerning both the origin of Purim and the contents of our story. Now, his very long-winded point, that era that has Artaxerxes as king in the Book of Esther, is misinterpreted. That's the wrong era. That's not what it actually means. Yes, it is, and it's very clear that it is, because the palace is in Shushan, however you want to say it, and Darius is the one who moved it. The Artaxerxes right after Darius is his grandson. That's it. To try to say it's the son of Cyrus is just ridiculous, and we'll go through that a little bit. Now, he then moves to rewrite history. He fabricates, of course, and we are supposed to just buy it because, well, he said so. Problem, he can't read, and even Josephus says it was Artaxerxes' era. The same one, the same Persian king, grandson of Darius. Now, it's a lot to go through to try to prove something, but we see these gymnastics all the time, when along the way he keeps having to inconveniently cite that history is riddled with problems for Esther. Did you know this? Have you ever heard it in your church? Oh yeah, and he also assumes Esther was in the original Septuagint. He doesn't have that index. No one has a list of books in the original Septuagint, and no copy of Esther is found in that scroll library that far back whatsoever. Not even close, because the earliest fragment that we found of the Book of Esther is after most of this period that we're talking about. Some say the 4th century. So we'll give them that, if that even is. The Septuagint is known to have added books. That's no surprise, and really, it's a Pharisee document, so it's what they do. They add, they leaven things, they add their gas bubbles to things. In fact, we have seen the same such scholars actually claim Maccabees was in the original Septuagint. Realize that's 200 to 300 BC, that's when the Septuagint was originally translated. And the story of Maccabees, well, that didn't even occur for another century or so. So they have a book written before the events even happen. Well, maybe they did, however, as, well, they do love to forecast their moves ahead of time, but all the more damning. However, he admits many scholars discovered problems with Esther continuing, not new, which is his misrepresentation there, although he does talk about the others in history. But he's very, very angry, you can tell. Now, they found Esther doesn't even match history. We'll cover this further in this series. We have a timeline as well, which crushes this book as impossible, in fact, and you're going to see this for yourself. This continued into the 19th and 20th centuries, and then he continues. In our skeptical age, we should expect such a story, the most credible of all the narratives of the Old Testament. Really? The most credible? Again, what's he doing? He's putting it up there, just like Maimonides did with Torah. Yet, We went through a few of those issues. That is stupidity. Now, you know he's a liar, because if that were the case, why is it so questioned, and legitimately so? Why isn't it mentioned by the Qumran priests in any context, and why isn't it in the New Testament? Those are massive problems for this book. Just the contrary has happened. Oh, those dumb goyim. None among them is more discredited by modern exegetes. Well, maybe there's a reason for that, except a few, than this story. Not just modern, by the way, it has always been questioned, period. The narrative is by some partly doubted, partly denied, by others denied altogether. In other words, we expected you, goyim, would just accept the narrative because, well, we say it's true. You are not supposed to prove it out nor test it at all. How dare you think? Many, in fact, most in modern scholarship have issues, either in part or in whole, even he admits. That is very telling. This book is even still today strongly questioned as scripture, and for good reason. Here's the wrap-up. The Bible keepers in Qumran, the sons of Zadok, the family who kept Scripture since Solomon, and their Levite ancestors, who were given such responsibility first by Yacob and then again by Moses, rejected Esther and Purim. It wasn't even on their calendar, as they did not keep that feast. They don't even mention Purim nor Esther in any of their writings. This tells us it wasn't even published yet, likely by their time, or they would have commentary, at least on it, condemning it based on the fact they do not view it as Scripture. That is the most likely scenario. The New Testament also remains conspicuously silent, as if they didn't even know about the story, as did Qumran. Enter the opposition, the sons of darkness who defiled the temple, exiled the temple priest, and replaced them with their new unbiblical order, the Pharisees, Sadducees, and what they called scribes, which are not the Old Testament scribes. They well knew this story and kept it as scripture, their scripture, not Bible, and the holiday. Why, it is a Pharisee event, not one from the Bible. Messiah would have kept it if it were biblical. He did not. Even some rabbis knew this and rejected this until the 4th century or so. Come on, there's nothing to debate here. The early church split between Pharisee and biblical tradition. That's what you saw on that map there. But still questioned and rejected in that age by the Ecclesias identified by Messiah in Turkey in the book of Revelation. But it was kept by Samaritan Pharisees and Rome, who preferred their doctrine over that of the Bible, and still does in very large part. That's another series. Martin Luther vehemently objected to Esther and Purim. The 18th, 19th, 20th, actually even 17th centuries continue to uncover doubt and more things that prove that Esther is not historical nor scripture. Persian history tells nothing of this story, and it doesn't fit Persian history. This is going to get worse when we cover the Bible timeline, to which Esther fails miserably. History tells us this book is not scripture, not Bible scripture. It is Pharisee scripture. Thus far, that is not complimentary, and that is not just our opinion. It is historical fact, well proven. We talk about what to do with this in the end, but on to the next video where we'll break down the story of Esther itself. Then we will deal with the accusation against Esther by many that it is an occult story in origin, including Martin Luther, because that's what he was saying. It has occult elements, essentially. And finally, we'll end with an assessment of the so-called Proto-Esther fragments from the Dead Sea Scrolls. Are they even Esther? Oh, this is going to be good. That one I'm really excited about. We hope you have learned some valuable insights from this testing of Esther in our original Canon series. Please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to click the bell. Of course, if you truly wish to be notified, go to thegodculture.com and fill in the pop-up, and we'll notify you since YouTube has failed us and you on that front for almost 2 years now. Imagine that. Over 100,000 subscribers, and hardly any ever get notified when we upload a video. It's rather laughable when you think about how ridiculous that is in censorship. They just can't bring themselves to let people know about our videos. Nice censorship, but it won't work, and it doesn't. Like us on Facebook at The God Culture, _space original. Also, check out our published books, now being read in over 60 countries worldwide at www.ophirinstitute.com. We locate the ancient land of gold, Ophir, and the Garden of Eden in the Philippines, which restores prophecy, and it is a monumental case indeed, also available in a dynamic pictorial coffee table book. We restore the Book of Jubilees to its rightful place as inspired Torah. Ooh, yep, we do. Check it out. We dare anyone to attempt to disprove these positions. We dare you, as we know that journey alone will change your life. Always remember to prove all things for yourself. Yah bless to everyone.